Okay, I'm gonna try to talk today about the minig in Klal Yisrael to clap by Haman and Graggers, but I want to come at it, more a little bit from a back door. So we'll talk it through. There's a famous person in history, Menashe ben Yisrael. I'm not sure, maybe they've heard of him, maybe you didn't. Menashe ben Yisrael, Reb Menashe ben Yisrael, was a Dutch converso, a child of Marranos, meaning his family came from Spain, were kicked out during the Inquisition. They moved to Portugal, and then eventually they moved to Amsterdam or one of the Dutch countries. And the family, when he was born, he was not even raised as a frum Jew. He was raised as like a Marrano, a pseudo-frum Jew. And over time, the family, once they moved to a more hospitable environment where they were allowed to practice their religion freely, they became much more frum. And this was a common thing in the Sephardic world at that time, in the early 1600s. It was common to have families who had lived as practicing Christians for 30, 40, 50, 60 years that were slowly coming back to rediscover their heritage. Now, Reb Menashe ben Yisrael was a big genius. And as a young child, as the family started becoming frum again, everyone clearly saw that he had a head for this. And he became a big Talmud Chacham. He was also a gracious scholar. He spoke 10 languages. He was able to write in most of them. He published books in many languages. He was a gracious Chacham. B'chol Ofen, as a young man, he became convinced that... one second. So most of his svarim, the topics that he covers is being miyashiv psukim from Christian critique to shtim them with the Jewish Messiah. Being that he was someone who straddled the line, he grew up in both cultures, he was very knowledgeable in how to answer this, and his svarim are mostly a defense of Klal Yisrael's understanding of the Nevi'im and a defense of Klal Yisrael's Havana in the Torah, Le'umas, the Christians' Havana. Now, as a young man, he became convinced that the American Indians, were the Aseres HaShvatim. Someone, a Rebbe of his who had traveled to the New World, came back and convinced him that the Indians were the Aseres HaShvatim, and based on that, he started developing idea of bringing Mashiach, that Mashiach, in his worldview, was predicated on Kibbutz Galuyos, on Jews from all over the world being brought back together under the flag, and being that the Marranos, his people, his family, his friends, had started coming out of the closet and joining back with Yiddishkeit, and he became aware of the fact that the American Indians were the Aseres HaShvatim. He felt that like all the strands were coming together to form the proper time for Mashiach to come. And based on his reading of a pasuk in Yeshaya, in the end of Yeshaya, that says Jews from all different places, and it says Me'iyim HaGedolim, from the large islands, he came to believe that Jews being able to live in London, in the United Kingdom, was part of his vision of Mashiach. Jews had to be Be'iyim HaGedolim. And based on that, he reaches out to the king of England, the ruler of England at the time, Oliver Cromwell, and we've mentioned this briefly before, and he starts the process of getting Jews readmitted back into England. Now, he ends up going to England in 1650-something. He goes for 2 years with his sons to England, and from there we have big marachas where he writes to Catholic scholars about his view of Mashiach, and they write back, and it's most of his books were published in either Spanish or Latin, and some of them in Hebrew eventually, but he was be'ikr preaching kilu to the Goyish market, to the Christian market, to explain the Jewish worldview to the Christian market. Now, eventually he's somewhat matzliach, and Jews are allowed to live in London and England in an unofficial capacity. They're not officially allowed back, but they're allowed there in an unofficial capacity. Now, the first group that comes is a group of Sephardic Jews, Sephardic ex-Marrano Jews from Amsterdam, where he was coming from. He brought people, people that he knew, people his type. Sephardic ex-Marrano Jews from Amsterdam, and they opened a shul, a small shul in a house in London. The Kehillah picks up because, they were making money. There was a lot of free trade between Amsterdam and London, and they were making money. The Kehillah picks up, and eventually, in the end of the 1600s, they have to open a big new shul. It's called Shara Shemayim, the shul, and it's nicknamed the Bevis Mark Synagogue because it's in the neighborhood of Bevis Marks in London. Now, the Bevis Mark Synagogue is still functioning today. It's still open. It's still an Orthodox shul, actually, in London. It's a beautiful, beautiful old shul. The Bevis Mark Synagogue opens up in the end of the 1600s. I don't know exactly the year. The end of the 1600s, towards the 1700s, and the Bevis Mark Synagogue is ran like a very traditional Sephardi shul. Now, a Sephardi shul in those days was ran by the Ma'amad. There was a group of Balabatim who ran the shul, and they had their fingerprints on everything. The Rabbanim were just hired hands. Like they didn't really, and this leads to major fights in the Sephardic shul world actually. But the Anshe Ma'amad ran it, and what's unique about the Bevis Mark Synagogue is that the Anshe Ma'amad kept phenomenal records of everything that they did in the shul, and it's preserved till today. So several books were written about the notes of the Anshe Ma'amad from the Bevis Mark Synagogue, and in it you'll find lots of interesting things, and many occurrences of racism towards the Ashkenazim, who were starting to trickle into England towards the end of the 1600s, and like Ad Kedei Kach, that they had a rule, the mashal, that the kupas hatzedakah of the community could only go to someone who's a Sephardi couple on both sides. The husband and the wife are Sephardim. If even one half of the couple is Ashkenazim, they can't get any tzedakah. If a single person would show up to the kehillah looking to be put on the rolls to get help, they would pay for his ticket back to Amsterdam. They would give him $2 and a ticket back to Amsterdam. There's like many examples. It's all documented very clearly. But now, the part that I'm told, that the reason why it caught my attention and relevant for today is because the Bevis Mark Synagogue, the Anshe Ma'amad, described their first interaction with Ashkenazi Jews in Shul. Now keep in mind, these were people who had grown up in the Christian world and were used to a very strict decorum, a shul with in the lines, and the chazan davened, and everyone sat quietly in the pews, and no one made noise, and then these Ashkenazim came in, coming from Poland or Russia, and you have to read the complaints there. They're noisy, they're unkempt, they don't know how to follow decorum, they talk, they schmooze. Now, so in nothing changed. So now, in here is l'chayra somewhat of a limud schus for Ashkenazi behavior, and somewhat of a vise that this behavior pattern has been going on for a long time. The limud schus aspect of it is that a lot of their complaints are not about them talking during Chazar Hashatz, for example, like Zachem Dvarim Asurim. A lot of the complaints are because they daven Psukei de Zimra too loud, and they sing too much, and they don't stay in their seats. So a lot of their complaints are like a flasig davening. A good Ashkenazi Jew who wasn't used to this strict decorum of sitting in a seat and following shul the way you're supposed to follow shul. Of course, in there is also complaints about talking during davening and things that are asr, that we know clearly Shulchan Aruch holds are asr for Sephardim or Ashkenazim. That's not a question. But there is a small amount of alimut schus in there, that their complaints, a lot of them, are about like the flavor, the fleshigkeit of the Yiddishkeit of the Ashkenazim. It wasn't so sterile. Now, just to bring a few different strands of things we talked about together over here, back in the fight between Aaron Charon and the Chassam Sofer about music in shuls, Aaron Charon, in his piece, he writes over there that a guy who would walk into a shul, he only knew Ashkenazim, would walk into a shul, a guy would walk in, he would laugh at us. He'd say, what a bizayin. You guys are screaming and yelling and running and coming. There's no decorum, no one's sitting in their place, no one's davening. The way he mocks a shul is like any a Christian walking in and saying look at this lack of decorum, look what's going on over here. Now he's not, and then he obviously morphs into a befrat that they even get led to talk during davening and even could talk dvarim asurim. So again, the main thrust of his complaint is that guys are everyone's davening a little bit too happy, too intense, too fleshig in the shul. The talking during davening and the actual dvarim asurim are almost like a minor complaint. He rather ends off in that letter, Aaron Charon, that the Reform had wanted that shul should only be open on Shabbos, and during the week, you daven in your house, you daven elsewhere. Now, this minhag was kind of adopted, let's say, by the Young Israel movement that has a main sanctuary for davening, and then side rooms for during the week, because there's less of a crowd. But they wanted that to be always, and they explained that it's a maila. The Beis HaKnesses is like Meir Mikdash. It's a heilige place. You can't just be shagar there, be free, run around, do whatever you want. It has to be heilig. It has to be... He said the only way to maintain decorum, to maintain that when people come to a shul, they'll feel some sort of presence, some sort of sense that they're in Hashem's house and they're going to daven differently, is if it's only open once in a while. If you come on Shabbos and it's a solemn ceremony and you walk in, people will daven with Hazah, Rischa, they'll be afraid of the Beis HaKnesses. So even Aaron Charon, writes to them that this idea is great in theory, but L'maisa davening is a mitzvah every day, and probably shul should be open every day. So even he, was not okay with that. But the idea behind it was to mun decorum, was to mun a certain seriousness and straightness during davening in shul. Now, interestingly enough, the Mesek Eliezer, who's one of the Meshivim against Aaron Charon in the Eila Divrei Bris that we quoted from before, the Mesek Eliezer writes that in his opinion, the reason why the Magefa of the Reform came and the attack of the Reform was primarily on the Beis HaKnesses, the reason why that came is because we're not quiet in shul, is what he says. because people are not quiet in shul, and he's talking about the Dvar Masurim. He's not talking about davening a Hartzig Psukah Zimra. I don't think he has a problem with that. He's talking about that people talk. So Mela, he says the Averu is in the shul, so the Einish comes in the shul. So part of the conversation is always about this decorum in shul. Now, so B'chalev, and to me, it shows that for the longest time it's been the same challenge, and it also shows that a lot of it stems from a good place, so to speak. There is a limud chos that a lot of the inability to sit in our seats quietly and just do what we're supposed to stems from this, we're comfortable in shul and we're excited to daven, and it's not so sterile and state like that. Now, the one time where we do find that noise in shul is encouraged, but dafka encouraged, is Purim. So let's talk about that minig and the moderating factors of that minig, because obviously it's not just Chaim Tzvi's here. I have to be careful. It's not just you do whatever you want and you make all the noise you want. So as follows: the earliest place I think that we know of that the minig is brought down is in the Ravon Hayarchi. It's a Rishon. Ravon Hayarchi says as follows. He says the minig was to take 2 sticks and to write on each one of them Haman's name, Haman Agagi, write on each one of them. And then you would take them and you would clap them against each other like this until the words that were written on them, until you hit them so many times that the word that was written on it would get erased. And he says, L'kayim mashenemar macha emcha. Like macha emcha, you're erasing it against itself. That's his version, the Ravon Hayarchi's version of explaining the minig of clapping during Haman. Now the Ramah, right off the bat, it's kedai to show, the Ramah in Tafresh Tzadik, in the Siman of Kriyas HaMegillah, the Ramah brings as follows. And listen to the nuance. The Ramah says as follows. He says, Oid kasvu, shenago atinoikis, the minig amongst the children was, Lotzer tzuras Haman al eitzim vavanim. He says to draw a picture, not even words, to draw a picture of Haman with the pointy hat on stones or sticks. Oy lichtoiv, shem Haman aleim, or to write the word Haman on them. Ula hakoisan zel zer kadeshim chashmai, and then to clap them one against the other so that the name of Haman should get erased. Al derech machatim chazecher amalek. B'shem Risham Yirkab. As I the Ramah. It says the Ramah, and here's the important part. It says the Ramah, Umizeh nishtarviv haminig. From there, it kind of cascaded down. It broke down to us the minig. Shemakim Haman k'shekarim hamegillah beis haknesses. So you see clearly from the Ramah that the core minig that the Ravan was talking about had absolutely nothing to do with Kriyas HaMegillah. It was a Purim pastime, or a general kiyam mitzvahs mechias amalek, was to write Haman on it and to clap the sticks or the stones. It had nothing to do with this man of Kriyas HaMegillah. Says the Ramah, but from this was nishtarviv to us the minig to do it during Kriyas HaMegillah. Kishakarin HaMegillah beis haknesses. And here's the Ramah, this is the important line over here. The Ramah does not always put this at the end of a minig. Even strange minhagim don't always get this caption. Says the Ramah, ve'ein levatel shul minig. We're not supposed to be levatel any minig. Oy lilig alav, or make fun of it. Ki loy lechinam hukvu. Because it wasn't established for no reason. Now, it's a double mad nazach. Aleph, the minig that we have in shul, is not even the primary minig of Mechikas Amalek. The primary minig that the Ramah is relying upon, the minig that the Ravan quotes and that other Rishonim quote, is to do it on sticks. The Ramah writes the minig of clapping during shul is nishtarviv from that, and even though it's only nishtarviv from that, we should be shomer minhagim. So now, there are many chuvas that picked up on this nuance in the Ramah, why the Ramah decided to say that over here, and the consensus is go for that. Heyois, talking during, noise in shul has always been a shter. It's always been a challenge. It's always been a blight, kilo, that we're trying to moderate and to keep in its proper amount and its proper, deal with it properly. And over here, the Ramah is coming and telling you during a time when you need to be Yotze Kriyas HaMegillah that we should make noise. So the Ramah says, I chap that's weird. Like that doesn't mamash stim with like the agenda that we have going throughout the whole Lichas Tefillah, where I'm encouraging quiet. And over here, I tell you noise. The Gans Kriyas HaTorah, the Ramah says you have to be quiet every word, hear every word. Over here, I tell you make noise. So the Ramah says, yes, maskim, it's a little bit incongruous with the decorum that we're looking for in a shul, but it comes from a good place. So let's just talk about what this minig actually comes from, what the underlying reasons for this minig are. So now the Ravan brings it down. He says machatimcha. Now there are those who say that machatimcha is not machatimcha against itself. Machatimcha is an extra drasha. The Torah could have just said timcha zechar malek. What does it say? Machatimcha. Is Machatimcha is to teach us that any time the name of Amalek or the name of Haman is mentioned, there's also a din of Mechias Amalek on the name itself. So it's like a kiyam of the deraisa of Machatimcha. So Memela, it's kilo a very important thing. It's something that is a kiyam of the mitzvah of Machatimcha. So yes, the whole Megillah is about that same mitzvah in a certain way. The whole Megillah is about showing who Amalek is and what Amalek is to us and why it's our chayv to always Muhammad Hashem Amalek midar dar. So this is an action along the same vein. Now, other reasons. What do you say? So it's brought down, I think, in the Mata Moshe. It's a Talmud of the Marshal. Brings down that Joshua. It's early, 400 or 500 years ago already. I don't think he might say Isa Medrash. We don't have a Medrash that actually says that. You know what I'm saying? It's early enough. It's an early source. Now, I'll just say like this: the Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, it's Gebracht B'Shmai. This is not in Rabbi Yehuda Chassid Sefer. It's brought in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. A very different reason for this minig. That's interesting. He brings. I'll read it for you. Pamachas Shul Hegmoin Miragensburg is Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Non-Jewish Hegmoin, call it an officer, a minister, asked Rabbi Yehuda Chassid of Regensburg, why are you banging on the walls when you're being maskir Haman? Now, this story is brought in later Sfarim. It's not brought down in Rabbi Yehuda Chassid Sefer alone, but if the dating is to be believed, then Al Kapanim, this is a minig that was very nafutz already, came out 1,000 years ago. Meaning it's a minig, the Ravan is from that kufa, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid is from that kufa. It's a minig that's very nafutz for 1,000 years. He asked him, so what's with this banging when you mention Haman? So Amalei Rabbi Yehuda lehegmain, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid told the hegmain, Kol kach tefika shanu doifkin, whatever we bang when we hear the name Haman, kach hashedim doifkin le begehenim. Whatever the amount of clapping and banging that's going on over here is translated with kinetic energy to Haman in Gehenim. So the hegmain has a very good question, one I would ask also, Amalei min Allah, how do you know that? I mean, we're down here, Haman's somewhere else with these shadim. He wasted us. Amalei, he told him, Bava Erecha, come and I'll show you. Halachima, he took him with him. The Hereu b'Pesach Gehenim, he brought him to the viewing gallery of Gehenim, to the doors. V'Rasha Ekeyu, and he saw that they were hitting him. Pasach Hegman v'Amar ilu hayisi etzlechem hayisi misayei lechem la'akaisei. If I would be there, I would add some klep too, said the minister. Now, again, this is not something that we have from any super reliable source that Yehuda Chassid actually said this, but it is gebracht like upon him in the name of Yehuda Chassid that the makar for this minig is because it causes Haman tsar when we clap by Haman. Now there are other reasons also. The Chassam Sofer seems to say, it's a little bit tricky to read it, but Chassam Sofer seems to say that, and this is rather something that talks to me, is that Ba'atzem, we're very busy being Moicha Hashem Amalek, right? That's our agenda with Amalek. The way we try to remember Amalek always is Macha Timcha. Now, the Megillah is in a certain way a very like the opposite of Macha Timcha. It's a nice remembrance of Amalek. Yes, it doesn't end well for him, but at the end of the day, we're talking about Amalek, and we're talking about it. So Chassam Sofer says, like, to correct for the issue of that we're kilu giving Amalek eartime. We're giving Haman eartime instead of just wiping him out. We're giving him some eartime. So to correct for that, we stamp when we say his name. So no, we're not giving you any eartime. You're like an incidental to the story. The story's about the Hatzalah of Klal Yisrael and what Hashem did for us. Incidentally, you're mentioned, so we're gonna make it thing. Now, these are some of the reasons that are gezakt for the din of Mechias, for the din of banging by Amalek. There are other ones also, but again, let's keep in mind all of these are, they're b'derech efshers. None of these are overwhelming reason for the minig. Yes, granted, the minig is an old minig. It's certainly 1,000 years old to clap and to bang, but the reasons are not, Allah Mishra Sinai. Now, there's a tshuva from the Maram Shik, where the Shul writes to the Maram Shik, and it's like the Maram Shik considers it Purim Torah. The Shul writes to the Maram Shik that the makar for clapping during Megillah learning by Haman is me'anshik Knesset Agdola. It comes from the Anshik Knesset Agdola, and he has some rayas that it comes from the Anshik Knesset Agdola. During the tkufa that they were kaveh to read the Megillah, they were also kaveh to clap by Haman. And he has some rayas, the Shayla has the Mamshik. Mamshik has very, very little time and patience for this. He says, of course, that's silly, it's pashit, that's not true. Yes, it's a chashav minig. Yes, it's brought down in the Ramah. And yes, it's even worth fighting for, says the Mamshik. I'm not saying to be mvatlet, it's an important minig. One shouldn't be mvatlet, but to say that it comes to Anshik Knesset Agdola is ludicrous. It's of course a minig that developed later. He says, like the Ramah says, nishtarviv. So he says, but kivin deshtaruve yishtarviv, says the Ramshik. But okay, Haint it already was nishtarviv like this. It came down to us this way, so it's here already. That's it. It's here to stay. But don't say that it comes to Anshik Knesset Agdola, says the Ramshik. Now, in that same tshuva, there's a piece that the Mishabur brings down also that the Ramshik handles. If you look at the Mishabur Afanart, where the Ramah brings this down, the Mishabur brings down some cryptic words. He says, nishtarviv that were makim Haman by the Kriyas HaMegillah. Says the Mishabur, Maharil lo yachayshish lahakas Haman. The Maril was, he was unconcerned with Hakayas Haman, with banging by Haman. Now, there's more than one way one could read this. How would you read this? Do you say the Maril, Haman, he wasn't concerned by it, meaning it didn't shtar him? He said, yeah, bang, do what you want. Or lo chayshish la'kayis haman. He said, it's not important. Don't be busy with this. How do you read the words of the Maril when he says when the Maril says lo chayshish la'kayis haman? So there are those who bring the Maril. L'mashal the Pri Megadim seems to learn it this way, and others the Pri Chadash maybe also seem to learn the Maril. The Maril lo chayshish la'kayis haman. The Maril was against it. The Pri Megadim comes out very strongly against it. The Pri Megadim says Yatzischar b'Hafseidai. You can't be Yatzid the Megillah like this. It's a terrible thing. It's a shtar. Says the Pri Megadim, and the Maril also lo chayshish la'kayis haman. He wasn't busy with this minig b'chlal. Others, Rabbi Yaakov Emden and this tshuva from the Ramshik, Rabbi Yaakov Emden does it much more short. The Ramshik does it in a very nice way. The Ramshik goes and shows you how looking through the Minhagim Maril, you'll be able to see that the Maril was Bal Kaireh. The Maril was laning. It says when it says the Maril, says the Ramshik, when it says the Maril, the Maril meant, meaning the Maril wasn't bothered by it. Meaning they were noisy, they were clapping, they were doing what they were doing. He says, you're going to ask me, we don't find anywhere that the Maril clapped Haman. The Maril is full of Minhagim, and the Maril never says to do it, so Mastama Le'eh Chayshish doesn't mean that. Says the Ramshik, you don't find anywhere that the minig was for adults to clap during Haman. He says, that's not the minig. Says the Ramshik, the minig was for children to clap during Haman. A father wants to participate, a little stamp, well, knock yourself out. But the minig that the Ramah is referring to, the shtaruv, the shtarviv, the Maril, etc., says Leimatzinu, that it's Gizak Begedolim B'chlal. What's you're looking for a makar for the Maril to say adults should clap Haman? That's not the minig b'chal. That was never the minig. So no, so Yehuda Chassid Mashma, yeah.
Does he say Ketanim?
He says, yeah, the minig was Ketanim. But
the Maril brings that Ketanim?
No, Maril doesn't bring that Ketanim either. Incidentally. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, in his own way, Rabbi Yaakov Emden says that the Maril Chayshish means like the Ramshik says. Maril Chayshish meaning it was something that didn't bother him. He allowed them to do it. But the Maril, he doesn't go into any sorts of calisthenics to figure out what the Maril's role in the synagogue was or what the Maril's position was. He just says, I remember my father Chacham Tzvi, as a young man, would clap during Haman. And he's talking about his father Chacham Tzvi himself as an adult. So there you have both ways, that it's an adult clapping, and Mele he learns the Maril that it's Lo Yachoshish Lo, it wasn't a problem. Now, Lamaisa, obviously, everything in moderation. So the Mishnah Berurah himself in Siman Tafresh Peites, the Mishnah Berurah brings down, I think it's all the way in the end of Siman Tafresh Peites. Hang on. Here, the Mishnah Berurah brings down as follows. The Mechaber says, Minig Toiv Lahavi Ktanim Uktanis L'Shmaya Mikra Megillah. It's a Minig Toiv to bring young children, boys and girls, to hear the Megillah. This is Mishum Chinuch. Says the Mishnah Berurah as follows. V'achshav not only do the kids not come and hear it, and thus you're being yotzi yecheves chinuch, elahim mevalvelim, they disturb it for everybody. Even the adults can't hear it anymore. They're only there sitting waiting. When's Haman coming? They're not listening to the Megillah b'chlal. Now this is the kicker. Says the Mishnah Berurah, forget about that it's sharing the adults. It's a waste of time. The mitzvah chinuch was not to be mechanech your children to clap by Haman. The mitzvah chinuch is to be mechanech your children to hear the Megillah. So if your children don't even come to listen to the Megillah, then you're not mitzvah chinuch. So it's some bracha. You have the annoyance of having your kids sitting all over you, which you don't need to have, and you're not being yotzi the mitzvah chinuch. So stam yatzischar b'hafseid, this says the Mishnah Berurah. It makes a joke of the whole thing. But emes mitzad mitzvah chinuch says you want to know how chinuch should be applied to Mikra Megillah. Tzarach kol av lahachzik banav aktanim etzlei. Every father has to keep his children right by him, ulahashkiach aleim, and to watch over them closely. Sheyishmu akriya, so that they should hear the kriyas HaMegillah. And when the Kaira does get up to the words of Haman HaGagi, let the katan, let the katan do kimin hagay. The child could bang like he wants to. But not that should be the primary reason, and the primary reason why you're bringing katanim to the Beis HaMedrash. So says the Mishnah Berurah, who brings the minig and brings many poskim who did it, and it's by Vos, it's by Kant Chavetz Chaim himself. Used to clap during Megillah laning. I'm sure it wasn't some crazy clapping, but the Chavetz Chaim himself we know used to clap by Haman. But Mishnah Berurah himself, literally a page apart, Mishnah Berurah says not done with proper moderation is Yatzischar b'Hafseidei. A, you're not Yotzi Megillah the adults. B's, the kids are not Yotzi the mitzvah chinuch. So you stam have nothing. So now, so of course moderation is important. Now Lamaisa in the Sephardic world. In the Sephardic world, there was a big push to ban this minig. I don't know how kavua this minig was in the Sephardic world b'chlal. It's really an Ashkenazi minig. It comes from Paris and from France and prevents, like it's an Ashkenazi minig, but there was of course some crossover over the Deiris where Svardim also adopted this minig, and there was a big push in different Svardim yeshivim to ban this minig, to get rid of it. Lamashal, I'll read you. What do you say? Banging in Ganzen, yeah. Not moderation, exactly. The banging in Ganzen. I'll bring you for example. Well, it stems with the shul, the Shara Shemaim shul that we started off with insisting on a more proper decorum in a synagogue, with insisting on a more mature presentation, not such a boisterous presentation. Now, I'll read you just from one tshuva from Sefer Melitz Yosher. It's the Minhagim of Amsterdam, the Sephardi Minhagim of Amsterdam. It says as follows: V'nira kami yisurim yesh b'zeh. Says the writer, let's count out how many yisurim you have with this. S'chayk v'kalas roish, that's number one. Habanim einam shemim l'kol aviyim, a lack of kibbut of aim. The kids are disobeying their parents. The parents are getting frustrated. No, enough, and the kid's not listening. It's a lack of kibbut of aim. Most of the adults are not being Yotzei Kriyas and Megillah b'chlal because they're only hearing a small part of it. Bilbul HaKriya, disturbing the Kriya, meaning the Bal Kaira, Bilbul HaKriya, is that it's not a proper Kriya anymore because no one can concentrate anymore. And then, V'chucha Tlula Be'enei Ha'amim, this again is not an Ashkenazi concern, that we look like a mockery in the eyes of the nations, meaning the Ashkenazim definitely were not concerned with this, that we look like it's like a joke. This is not a serious place, in a serious house of faith, this would never go on. This is what's going on over here. The Gam Kain, he says, Chashash Sakonis Nefashis. It also could lead to a danger, because people, he says, no, I take it back. It's going to get to that. This is a little bit more nitpicky. The people are fasting and you're schlepping it out. Who knows if someone could die of hunger while they're waiting for you guys to stop clapping? It says, it could hurt someone's eardrums. Someone who has a weak system, it could hurt his eardrums. This is a very, very kvetchy rendition of the minig. He says, and I estimate that the minig back then was to do it. People back then were very strong. They were able to fast longer. Their ears didn't hurt. I'm reading you literally what he says. The standard age of death, 1,000 years ago was about 25. They were very strong in regards to their ears and their ability to fast and etc. But b'chalaifin, and you'll find this is a recurring theme. Ad Kedei Kach Rav in Chazon Avadia on Purim has a huge rant, very similar to this, about how this is a bad minig, and he says this is an exclusively Ashkenazi problem. We'll leave it by the Ashkenazim. We don't need to have this in our shuls. This is not something we need to have by us. Now, Lamashal, Rav Chaim Palachi's son, Rav Avram Palachi, in Izmir, there's like a whole marach of tshuvas. It's 10 pages long, so I'm not going to read it, where he's actively working to eradicate the minig, to see to it that this minig is eradicated across all the shuls in Izmir in Turkey, because this is a crazy minig that ruins it for everybody. So, Al Kopanim, I would just say the range. Let's just say like this: the idea that a shul is boisterous and that a shul is not so filled with proper decorum amongst the Ashkenazi Kehilas is definitely well founded. That it's always been a challenge and something that we fight and work on to not do Dvar Masurim is a munach. That's Pashut. Comes Purim, there's clearly an Alta Minig that made it into shuls at a very early point. Already in Yehuda Chassid's day about 800 years ago. Obviously, within moderation. This minig let to run loose, hakol moedim. You're not going to have a Megillah. You're not going to have a Megillah leaning b'chlal. We definitely find many poskim who feel that it's mostly for children, not for adults. You find others who say it should be, gentle clapping. Don't get out of hand. Don't get crazy. And then you find in the Sephardi world, which matches up with how we're describing the shul environment b'chlal in the Sephardic world, and how they felt Ashkenazim were very out of place in that world. That this is a minig that's not appropriate, that's just disruptive and should be gotten rid of. Now, I think Rav Adi says not to do it. And every shul makes their own rules. I'm saying every shul has moderations on this. Svardim, no, the Rav Adi says not to do it. Rav Adi says Svardim shouldn't do it. But in the Ashkenazi world, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. By us, the idea of having a varma shul and a fleishig shul certainly has value, right? Like, again, you can't take it too far. There has to be moderation, otherwise you destroy the whole thing. But the idea of a fleishig shul certainly exists. Now,
Can you start to raise it $2 to send the Ashkenazim back to Edge?
Could I?
I'll match.
Or Hashem, the racism lives on. Okay, now if I could just bother you for 2 more minutes, I came across a story last night that I think is worth sharing. It has absolutely nothing to do with this Indian. It does have to do with Amsterdam, so I'll just share it. It does have to do with Amsterdam. What do you say? Yeah, exactly. It does have to do with Amsterdam, where we're all moving after he's done with us. So it's a Purim story worth sharing. There's a piyut, a very strange piyut in the Machzavitri. It's worthy of a share on its own, but there's a strange piyut in the Machzavitri called Leil Shikurimu. It's like a bar song, like a drunken bar song about the first night of Purim. It's actually the only makar in the Rishonim that drinking the first night of Purim is a thing to do. But it's a shir that met a lot of pushback because it's a little bit silly, it's a little tzanistic. Some people even said it has a little bit of nivel peh in it, it's not so clean. Others said it doesn't come from the Machzavitri. It's a whole tumult on its own, worth talking about at a different time, maybe next year Purim. But just there's a crazy story that I came across last night. In Amsterdam there was a Rav, his name was Rabbi Eliezer Margolius. He wrote a sefer called Meiser Rekeach on the Mishnayos. It's Kabbalistic interpretations of the Mishnayos. Meiser Rekeach, it's called. He's actually the great grandfather of the Belzer Rebbes. The Rekeachs, his name was Margolius, but eventually when they had to take a last name in Galicia, they were Einiklach of Rabbi Eliezer Margolius. They took the name Rekeach from the sefer Meiser Rekeach, and all the Belzer Rebbes, all the Rokachs, are Einiklach of this Meiser Rekeach. It's a famous Bal Moifes. Now, there's a story that's gebrach where he says, the story is brought down, it's Belzer folklore, let's call it, that says as follows. In Amsterdam, one year, this is talking the early 1700s, as Purim was coming, Amsterdam is a city that has lots of levees and dikes and like dams. It has a lot of water in it. There was some sort of sea serpent fish that they had never seen before. He describes it as some sort of, unearthly serpent. Let's, for argument's sake, say it was a whale that got lost in a canal. It was a pod of, killer whales that got lost in the canals in Amsterdam. They don't belong in there, and they kept breaching up against the canal walls, and they were doing tremendous damage. It says that no one knew what to do with it. It was like there was this crazy fish, this crazy sea serpent, the primitive way of looking at it that was there, and they didn't know what to do with it. And the kids were enthralled by it, and I'm guessing that it was a killer whale only because of the eyes, the pattern. He says the story is gebrach that the kids named it the Purimia serpent, the serpent of Purim. It was around Purim time, and they tried to dress up like it. They made masks that had different colors on their faces to dress up like the fish. So that's why I'm guessing it's some sort of whale with markings on its head. They dressed up like it, and he says, but at Lamaisa the kids were dressing up and having fun, but it was a great concern for the Kehillah. And the night of Purim, the whale or whatever it was breaching hard, and they were afraid that it was going to cause the levee to collapse, and they were going to have a flood, and the whole thing would be over. The whole city would be destroyed. So he says the Rav, Rabbi Eliezer Rekeach, Rabbi Eliezer Margolius, who's incidentally the Zayd of Ephraim Zalman Margolius too, who kept the real name. The Rokachs and the Margolius are cousins, but he called everyone to Shul, and he said, we have to do some sort of slicha, some sort of kinna, some sort of tefillah that we could say to avert this disaster. And he took out a Machzavitri, which is full of the Nusach and the Piyutim. He starts flipping through the Purim section, doesn't see anything that talks to him for this thing, and suddenly he opens up to this piyut, which is not by the Purim section, it's elsewhere in the Machzavitri, Leil Shikurumu, this silly piyut of Leil Shikurumu, and he says, this is the one we should say. And he starts saying it, and in it there's words about, obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu being Matzal Klal Yisrael, and about giving drink to everybody, give wine to everybody, let everybody be shikr, don't be karg. Someone drinks water, he's over an isser, like crazy things in the piyut. And they read it, with grace kavana at chatzos on Purim by night, and then afterwards he turns to the Gabbai and he says, give everybody to drink. And the Gabbai says, we don't have enough of that, we have a stock for the year, we're going to run out. He says, it's mefurish in the piyut, don't be karg, give everybody the stock. And everybody drank, and everyone was happy, and as they all stumbled out of the shul drunk, on Purim night, the first night of Purim, at 1:30 in the morning, they came across the canal, and the canal was blood red too. And they looked down, and they saw that the fish had ruptured its body with its scratching and banging on the wall, and it died. And they said that the blood of the fish looked like wine also. So this piyut of the Leil Shikurim, the drunken first night of Purim, saved the town of Amsterdam from this thing. Now, this is a story that's Gezakt Ibra in the Chassidish Welt. He's a famous Bal Moifes. The Baal Shem Tov used to learn his Svarim. It's worthy of a speech on its own, really. It's Machzavitri and etc., but I just wanted to share it.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.